Hello and welcome to Audible River. I'm Alan Rice, and I am very happy to have with me poet, writer, comic, storyteller, and terrible dancer, apparently, John Roedel. John is author of the best-selling book Hey God, Hey John, What Happens When God Writes Back, and John has published 5 books of poetry, including his latest, Fitting In is for Sardines. Hello, John. It's great to see you.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I mean, the excitement is mutual, so let's just say
Great.
that. you know, I and I wanted to say that when I first came across your work and I started reading your poetry, I just have to say it really touched me in a visceral way, and I think it has to do with the authenticity, the unpretentiousness, and poetry when it's done right, it really speaks to the soul. And I think that your work is doing that. And I don't want to embarrass you right off the bat here, but
Too late.
too late.
Uh,
Okay, all right.
I mean, and a lot of that's probably I didn't start writing poetry until about 4 or 5 years ago. I didn't study it. I got C minuses every time there was a poetry unit coming through in elementary school or high school or college. It really didn't ever connect with me until later on in life when it just started emerging out of me. So I appreciate the kind words. I feel kind of like a little bit of a stranger in a foreign land in this poetry world.
Well, I mean, I guess uh, right. I mean, I understand how you feel. I mean, I can relate to that in some ways. As an artist myself, I've
Mhm.
kind of been an outside. I don't, the art that I do, I basically learned on my own, and I never know if I'm doing it right. That kind of thing. And then when people tell me, "Oh, I like that," and it's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm."
Right. It's a surprise. What a
It's,
great surprise.
yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, so I can relate to that. Do you have something on hand that you can share with us right off the bat here, so we can get a taste of what you do?
Yeah, I will. We'll start with the poem that kind of broke me into people's maybe world a little bit. It was a poem I that no one had really heard of me before until this poem started circulating on social media about 3 years ago. And it was this poem that I wrote in the course of a little bit of a panic attack I was having. I had about 35 minutes. We were a single car family. My wife is a special ed teacher, and it was summer. It's about 3 years to the date almost when I wrote this. And I was having a panic attack, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So I sat down with my feelings and I wrote this poem, and it kind of within days traveled around the world a number of times, translated into multiple languages. There's a circus, like there's a single person like circus 3 act circus acts that was created from it. There's been dances. It's kind of become it's my Rick Ashley "Never Gonna Give You Up" one hit wonder poem that kind of exploded, and it's probably the reason I'm here today talking to you. So I thought I'd start with that one, and then we can talk about how my poetry maybe has evolved since then, because this is the first one that I wrote that really landed with people. And then after that, this people started going back through my old stuff and kind of connected with it too. But this is the first one that really hit people in the heart, I think. So I'll start with that one if you don't mind.
Beautiful. Let's hear it. Thank you.
And keep in mind, I was in the middle of a panic attack, didn't really know what was going on, and that's my process. I write to untangle knots, and I didn't know where this poem was going while I wrote it. And it wasn't until the halfway through that I really knew what the heck it was about. So here we go.
Okay.
My brain and heart divorced a decade ago over who is to blame about how big of a mess I've become. Eventually, they couldn't be in the same room with each other, and now my head and heart share custody of me. I stay with my brain during the week, my heart gets me on weekends, but they never speak to each other. Instead, they just give me the same note to pass between each other every week, and the notes they send to one another, well, they always say the same thing. They say, "This is all your fault." On Sundays, my heart complains about how my head has let me down in the past. And on Wednesdays, my head lists all the ways and times that my heart has screwed things up for me in the future. They blame each other for the state of my life. And well, there's been a lot of yelling and crying. So lately, I've been spending more time with my gut, who kind of serves as my unofficial therapist. Most nights, I sneak out of the window in my rib cage and I slide down my spine and I collapse on my gut's plush leather chair that's always sitting there for me. And I just sit until the sun comes up. But last evening, my gut asked me if I was having a hard time being caught between my head and my heart. I nodded. I said, I just didn't know if I could live with either of them anymore. I said, my heart's always sad about something that happened yesterday, and my head's always worked up about something that may happen tomorrow. My gut squeezed my hand. And I continued on. I said, I just can't live with my mistakes of the past or all my anxieties of the future. My gut smiled at me and said, in that case, I think you should go stay with your lungs for a while. I was confused, and the look on my face gave it away. But my gut said, if you're exhausted about your heart's obsession with your fixed past and your mind's focus on your uncertain future, then your lungs are the perfect place for you. There's no yesterday in your lungs. There's no tomorrow there either. There's only now. There's only inhale. There's only exhale. There's only this moment. There is only breath. And in that breath, you can rest for a while your head and your heart work out their relationship. So this morning, while my brain was busy reading tea leaves and while my heart was staring at old photographs, I packed up a little bag and I walked straight to the door of my lungs. But before I could even knock, she opened the door and with a smile and as a gust of wind embraced me, she said, darling, what took you so long?
Wow. No wonder it went around the world.
And it kind of exploded, and that poem really opened up a ton of doors for me, and not necessarily because it's this amazing work of literature that no one's ever thought about, a head and heart, debating and being in conflict with each other. That's the quintessential human experience. We all have that.
Yes.
But I think it's because I wrote it while I was feeling it and while I was able to translate the how that process was going on inside of me in a way that made it accessible for other people.
And I think that you hit that there. I mean, that is, and I think about, I mean, being a visual artist, I work on inspiration. The best work is inspiration. And if I think about it too much, or if I try to get too clever, it kind of loses its impact. It loses meaning. And so, the what I'm getting right there when you read that is that you were able to create something that captured a real moment.
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Yeah. And I'm an improv comic. That's kind of my background. I do stand up, but my training and where I cut my teeth was doing improv comedy. And that's all just saying yes to the moment. I mean, the only rule of improv is saying yes and. You say yes to what's been given to you as a suggestion,
Uh huh.
and then you just keep saying and. It's like pulling a thread, and you just keep pulling the thread. You keep saying yes, yes, yes to it as you're on stage, and you don't know where it's going. All you know is you have to keep trusting the original yes, and you keep saying yes to it. And that's how I write. Everything I write, and that's probably why poetry started for me, is because I write in the moment. I write when I'm feeling something, and I sit with that, and it's kind of the ultimate crowd suggestion. How do I feel? Here's your suggestion. Today you feel grateful. Write about that, and write while you're feeling grateful, not later, not a day later, not a month later, not doing an autopsy in how I felt. No, while you're sitting in the pocket of that emotion, and you write from there and see where it takes you.
Oh man, I love that. Well, I mean, that's almost a recipe for living life, isn't it? I mean, that's a creative process, and that's beautiful. But if you could imagine your whole life as being a creative process, I mean, that's taking it to the next level. That's just me riffing on it. That's all.
No, that's right. No, it's there are tons of philosophies of, improv philosophies. I mean, how much do you really are able to control in your life? We're able to control some things. We can plan and we can make plans and we can have a lot of guardrails in place, but there can be something that comes out of nowhere that changes everything. And you have to be able to say yes to it. The worst parts of my life, this where I've been stuck the most, is where I say no to something that's going on and I don't lean into it, embrace it, or try to explore it, the good and the bad. When you're on stage performing improv, the only thing you can't do is go on stage and have a in your mind, oh, this is exactly how it's going to go. You have to be a little bit like water. You have to go where the flow takes you. And it's taught me a lot in life. It's definitely my writing process of like, okay, I might want to go. I wanted to be David Sedaris. I think if I ever wanted to be a writer, I wanted to write funny things, Dave Barry, David Sedaris, whatever. I wanted to make people laugh. Writing emotional poetry was not on my bingo card, but it just started happening. And eventually, once I started saying yes to these words kind of buried inside of me, it changed everything.
Wow, it's like that was, I mean, it's like finding your real self in a way. I mean, that sounds trite.
Mhm.
I mean,
No,
that's a trite concept. I mean, because it gets said so often, but when it happens, you know what that means. I mean,
yeah,
we get brought into this life. I mean, you get maybe you show some talent when you're young, or you're good at a few things, and then you say, "Oh, what can I do with this?" And then you look for some ways to anchor that in the world, and then you just make that your thing, right? I mean, and
yeah.
that's right. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, right? And so I want to, I love this. I want to circle back to Terrible Dancer. Uh,
Good. Yeah, no, that should be talked about.
yeah, because I think that what we're talking about here, like with this creative process, to me, it is a dance. Because what you were
Mm,
talking about earlier is that you can't control life. Let's call life your partner. It's called the
right.
universe, the world. I mean, that's your dance partner,
Mhm.
and but we have, complete control. We should anyway. I mean, theoretically, over what we do, how we react, what we're
Yeah,
so. But if we're saying no, we're a terrible dancer.
right,
That's
right. It is the idea that and it's not taking yourself so dang seriously.
okay.
I love dancing. I mean, I really do love dancing, much to my teenage children's chagrin. I love to dance, but I know that I'm terrible at it.
Uh-huh.
But that's okay. It's amazing to be a terrible dancer. I say yes to it. Because again, I can't control the fact that I don't have a gene pool or the DNA or the rhythm to be a dancer. My parents couldn't dance. My brother can't dance. I believe my ancestors down the line, no one could ever keep the rhythm or
Uh-huh.
dance. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy it, and doesn't mean we can't say yes to it. And because here's the thing, we're all in this 2024 of perfectionism, and we have these Instagram and our Facebook social media feeds where everything's got to be perfectly put together. We have our hair's right, we have the
Oh,
right angle,
oh
we're
my
using
God.
the right filter. Our children's ties are on correctly. The meal we're having for dinner looks like a chef prepared it for us. Everything's got to be perfect. And I think with art, it translates to that. I think I was gatekeeping my own writing for years because I thought I wasn't good enough and because I thought, well, I don't have anything to offer. But really, it's okay to be terrible. I've written terrible things, and there's a lot of epiphanies I found when I write something terrible. Maybe it's never going to win an award or it's going to even be readable by another human being. But for me, usually in my most terrible, god awful, smelly writing, there's a couple lines in there that are like, wow, that's real and that's authentic.
Uh-huh.
And being a terrible dancer is kind of like, how you mentioned it earlier, the idea of sometimes poetry can be a little pretentious.
Yeah.
It can be, and that's probably why it was inaccessible for me for years. I thought I had to have an ascot and have a nice leather satchel, but no. It's just what we need is authenticity.
Yeah.
What we need is something real, and I think maybe that's why that poem worked.
Yes, and the real part. I mean, this is. I mean, okay. Me personally, that's what I'm like always chasing. What is real? And
Mm,
what are we calling real, and what actually is real? I mean, this is my like life's journey kind of thing. Now, I also know that of course, many people know you from the book. Hey God, Hey John, what happens when God writes back? So, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, your life
yeah.
before, during, and after this event, because obviously that was something that changed your life. Or, I mean, if you don't mind me saying so, but I'd like to
Yeah.
hear your story on that.
Yeah, it's probably got some definite midlife cliche hints to it, but so have we had a sketch comedy group I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is not necessarily the hotbed of sketch comedy in the world. And for a number of different reasons, I had always, through my entire adolescence, TV was my third parent. My parents had me later in life, so usually they would go to bed early and I was left with television. And Saturday Night Live was my church every week.
Oh my
I
goodness.
loved Saturday Night Live and I wanted to be on Saturday Night Live more than anything.
Hmm.
And that was my plan for my entire life, was someday I would move to Chicago and go to Saturday Night Live. Well, like we mentioned earlier, sometimes we can't control things that happen. And the dinosaurs couldn't control the comet. I couldn't control a number of situations that came my way, where I eventually had to go and help take care of our family's drugstore that had been opened in our town in the 1800s. And I had to come back from college. Instead of going to Chicago, I came back to help manage our family's like 110-year-old drugstore. And so I was in Cheyenne. I would say an inmate of Cheyenne during that time. That's how I viewed it. And I was
Wow.
like, well, I'll leave at some point. And then the roots got dug in deeper, and life, gave some more complications. And suddenly it was 10 years later, and I was still in Cheyenne, and I hadn't moved to Second City and done comedy.
Oh wow.
So I created, with a group of other people, our own little sketch group in town, in which we kind of had our own Second City here, our own Saturday Night Live here, where we were doing sketches, 4 or 5 sketch shows 4 or 5 times a year, where we would kind of lampoon Cheyenne a little bit. And I was able to get some of my passive aggressive feelings out through comedy on stage. And we would just put on shows. And it was a lot of fun. It was my first experience in really writing, and kind of writing something where I would do that. And then people would come to shows and they'd laugh at it. And I'd be like, wow, I was able to write something, put something that was in my head or my heart, put it on page. And then people came, paid money for it, and felt better when they left. And I felt like, wow, this is, despite me not really doing what I wanted to do in my life, this gave me a sense of purpose. And it gave me, it was a small time. I mean, I wouldn't even say minor leagues. It would be like a YMCA leagues of, as far as comedy,
Yes.
but it gave me a sense of purpose
Yeah.
and a sense of connection to something bigger than myself. And then, we did that for about 10 years, 11 years. And then about 2016, at this point, our family store had closed, and life, things had happened where I was really relying on this thing to keep my mental health well. Well, the cast and everyone had their children later in life, and we started slowing down doing shows. And then next thing you know it, we weren't doing shows at all. And I still had this void inside of me. It's like, well, I just found something I love to do, and I entered my first really dark night of the soul, and I didn't know what was going on at the time. Robin Williams had just passed away, and he was one of my heroes. And I started reaching this first existential crossroads, where I was a lifelong Catholic. I was born and raised in the Catholic Church. My parents were Catholic. Everyone down through my family line had been Catholic. In fact, at one point in my life, I had worked at a Catholic church, and all this, I guess, water I put in the faith well for years that I thought I could draw upon when I reached that kind of crossroads. I was going to the well, and the water was not quenching my thirst. And I was reaching this dark night, and I I was angry. I was angry that people would send me. They knew I wasn't feeling well, so they'd send me Bible verses and really cute things that didn't quite connect with me. I was reading all the self help I could find because I'd never done that before, and I kind of find myself resenting, you know, my faith, my upbringing, all these easy answers that people were giving me, and just pray harder and pray it away or whatever.
Right.
And I decided, well, I'm going to start lampooning it a little bit, and I'm going to start writing fake conversations to God, kind of like I was doing these sketch comedy shows, and where God would be a character, and we would just have conversations back and forth about benign things at first, why I shouldn't wear skinny jeans, or how to make a good risotto, or what happened on Survivor with Jeff Probst the night before. And it was going to just be poking fun at self help and poking fun at kind of my faith, and poking, because I was also reaching this very deep faith crisis and spiritual crisis. And I was poking fun at it all. And within about 2 or 3 months, I found myself going and bringing up topics that I was even surprised I was talking about and typing about. And at that point, maybe 20, 30 people were following along on this whole journey. And the very first time I typed out, I think I even acknowledged to myself that I thought I was experiencing depression was in one of those conversations.
Yeah. Wow. So, yeah, so this was so getting to that crisis. This was something new for you. I mean, at that point in your
Yeah.
life. I mean, would you call yourself an optimist, and you would, you felt like your faith was with you all the time, and that nothing bad would ever happen to you? Was it kind of like, was that your attitude, or?
I had never really been through it.
Uh huh.
I grew up in a middle class family. Life had been fairly easy for me at that point. I was never a great student. Coming back and not going to Second City and going on to Saturday Night Live and chasing that dream was maybe one of the worst things in my mind up until that point that had really happened to me.
Uh huh.
And I had a very easy. My If my life was a video game, the difficulty setting would have been like amateur. And
Okay.
then as you get older, you start bumping into more. And we had a child. He was born living with autism, and
Okay.
that was a certainly wasn't on the script I thought I would have as a parent,
Right.
and that became hard. And then it was just life in general, and then just really for me, what it was is watching the way people treated each other, like
Oh.
how the kind of the way as MySpace gave birth to Facebook, and I started seeing the way people interacted with each other. Looking back now, that was a poison that started settling in me long ago. And I
Right.
don't know if I was an optimist before, but I had been a person that thought, "Oh God, when I have my crisis, God will show up with riding a unicorn with a dove on each hand and fix things for me." And I was praying like I was told to pray, and I was doing all the things that good Catholic, guys who go to Catholic school are taught to do, and nothing was changing, and nothing was getting better. In fact, I was feeling worse every time I did it. It was like steady. It was like trying to talk to space, and nothing would call back. I was sending out signals everywhere I could. Okay, God, now it's your turn. I put all this good work in all my life. Now it's my turn to, make a withdrawal from the bank, and there was nothing coming back. And it was that feeling of wait, maybe I've been wrong this whole time. Maybe there's more hope. Maybe and it was this first feeling of true hopelessness. And that's what it was, definitely like a pall that laid over me. And in those conversations, in that, those first, I wrote about 900 of those conversations, believe it or not, in the first 2 years. Not all of them made it onto Facebook, but over that arc of those conversations, it just definitely showed how I started untethering myself from this very concrete theological system I was operating in to a much more improvised, untethered, free floating balloon that I kind of looked at myself as. And it was kind of a death of ego and death of reliance on theology. And then I put it into a book thinking, okay, once I put all these conversations into a book, I'm going to feel better and I'm going to move on with my life. And I did for a little while. And eventually that's when it started giving birth to poetry, because the training wheels of this. And I don't believe I was really talking. I mean, who knows? I don't know how anything works. Maybe God was using Facebook. I kind of doubt it. That it was more me working with my own consciousness, having these conversations. And then eventually the training wheels fell off where I didn't need to have it be in script form. And then these lyrics started coming out instead of having to have a back and forth with a God character.
I see. Wow, 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 wow. There's a lot to unpack there,
Yes, yeah, I bet, yeah.
and I'm resisting, putting my own interpretation over that, because I
Sure,
because I really want to, kind of
please
understand.
do. I can give
Well,
you a copay at the end of it. So
okay, all right, all right. No, no, I'd love to, because it's kind of what I do instinctually, but I'm going to resist that at the moment. Um,
okay.
so, but there's plenty of um, there people's experiences around the world all through time tell stories of an existential crisis. I mean, a really deep, life-threatening crisis that draws something out of them and changes them
Mm,
forever. And this is something that's repeated again and again. I can talk about my own experiences, but in your case, and this is why, and this is sort of, I mean, because you are someone who expresses, you were able to put this in writing, express it in a way that other people could see what was happening,
Yeah.
and other people could see themselves in this, because this to me is like at the core of being human. And you can, I mean, I totally get it, because I mean, I'll admit that I'm an amateur mystic, and so that and even at that, a lot of what I more or less experience or perceive or whatever I've learned, I don't exactly trust it right away.
Yeah.
I've got to really, I got to test this out. Is this my imagination? Is this or is this something that's really coming to me? But I feel like, though, I mean, as they say, the proof is in the pudding. As time goes on, would you say that something ignited and things were changing in you from that point on?
Absolutely. Certainly, like that one crossroad moment where I started typing. I remember because I was putting these conversations on Facebook, and for the first 2 or 3 months, it was all kind of silly. Every now and then, we might talk about something semi-serious, but eventually, that one moment, I typed out, "I'm not feeling very well. I think I'm living with some sort of depression." And I remember I typed out the whole thing, and God's response wasn't like a prescription, which is exactly what I needed. It wasn't like say 10 Hail Marys and then slaughter a goat at midnight and then,
Yeah.
jump through these hoops and then I'll take it away. It wasn't about that. It was much more relational. It was much more what you would want a beloved to say to you over a coffee house, a cafe table, to reach across the table, grab your hand and say, no matter what, you're loved. And that was really the core of the response back. And I remember feeling, wow, that's all I need to hear. Like I've been praying for like fix me, change things, intervene, but really all I needed was a little bit of like support and like love. Just like don't
Yeah.
fix it, just love me. And that was the kind of the conversation. I remember getting done with it thinking, I can't post this on Facebook. I live in a small town. People know me as a comic.
Yeah.
People know me as the class clown. People know me in this incarnate. I know myself as that. I cannot believe I wrote that. I'm sure there's times in your art and in your work where you've created something that's like, I can't believe I did. Where did this come from?
Right.
And this was that first moment. I'm like, I didn't even know I was, and I remember thinking, if I post this, I can't go back. There is no undoing this. There's a TMI
Right.
moment where you share too much and you're like, yeah, you can't put the toothpaste back in. And I remember posting it, at this point I only had a couple hundred people following me. And I thought, man, what are people going to think on what's my old college roommate going to think? What's my uncle going to think? What's my brother going to think? What do I think? It's like, you can't have, so I was about to get deleted. It was going to be the first time I would ever delete something. And I got a message from a gentleman in Ohio saying, thank you for giving me permission to have this own conversation with myself.
There you go.
And it was that inciting moment where it became more, it wasn't about me or I wrote something, oh my gosh, what a really profound conversation. It wasn't that profound of a conversation, but it created a safe space where someone could come around the campfire with me and start sharing their own experience and giving a microphone and space for other people. And luckily, my Facebook page has maintained that. It hasn't become the toxic dump that a lot of social media becomes. It's my favorite thing about it is people come and share their own perspectives and their own stories, and it gives people a safe place to just say, hey, I'm a human too, and this is how tricky it is to be a wisp of energy inside of a human's meat suit. And that was the first moment of that where I did that, and it wasn't about people pitying me or getting a reaction or having, there was probably some of that,
Yeah.
but it was about strangers saying thank you. And I remember finding that purpose that I was missing with those comedy shows. All of a sudden, there was like, wait, there is a level of service that I can provide. And it's not about me or being a great writer or coming up with some profound piece of Wayne Dyer wisdom that, someone else has had for thousands of years. It's just giving people permission and space to be authentic.
I love that. I mean, you know, I can relate in some ways, because in my life, I mean, I've always been interested in spirituality and, you know, parapsychology, these kind of
Hmm.
things.
Yep.
And I've studied with gurus and different kind of masters and teachers and whatnot and that sort of thing. And in early in life, I would never say it, but of course I had this this feeling like, okay, one day, I could be that guy.
Yeah.
I could be the guy sitting up there and everybody's like listening to what I'm saying or whatever. And it's sort of like and I mean it definitely is an ego thing, but to me, I kind of think of it like, in an immature state, I'm thinking about what I could be in the future. I've chosen an imperfect model, but I'm looking for a change in myself.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're doing and what you did here is a to me, it's like the perfect use of the tools we have in this modern age, and I'm glad that you didn't have training coming into this. If I
Yeah.
can, I'm saying that I think that in lots of ways the training ruins people in some ways,
Yeah.
because then you feel like you got to follow rules. I mean, oh yeah, oh I know what that is, and maybe you don't know what it is, but you've already put something into a slot. But if you come into something like if you're just a a reasonably intelligent, halfway open person, and you're looking at what could be real, and you're serious, but also not taking yourself seriously, and being honest. That's the main thing. Is that
Yeah.
is that honest conversation uh, that other people respond to it, and that's what got me. And you know what? I mean, the first time I came across your stuff, I think it just, I don't know, because of some things I like in Facebook. One of
Yeah.
your posts came up on my Facebook feed, and I can't even remember what it is right now. But I guess I have this a lie detector with all these the spiritual gurus and
Yeah.
whatever, and so like I like it was a video or something, and it's like this guy's real. This guy, he's saying his truth, and it feels like it's coming from a good place. And the reason I'm saying all this is that I had that immediate reaction, like in seconds, of just being exposed to you and your material, and so I think of it as I mean, what a synchronicity. You were about to delete that,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
and then this guy says, "Oh man, thank you. You created a safe space for me to have this conversation with myself." And I think that's the circle I'm trying to make here is that what the work that you're doing here, and I don't know if it's work really. I mean, you tell me. I mean, it's like me doing this podcast. I don't call it work. It's just like I'm just having fun.
Right.
But it's creating an opportunity for other people to think that this is okay. It's a different way because we have this tradition when we think about, like you were talking about your Catholic faith, that it's a very rigid formula. You got to say your Hail
Yeah.
Marys and you got to say your prayers. And I kind of think that at this point in my life, I think that like 99% of that is constructed to keep people out of trouble, not so much to
Yeah.
not so much to evolve you as a human being, but just to keep you from, hurting other people and going to jail, mostly. But
Right. Yep.
but the other part that I want to mention here that is important in what you shared is how this when you did that, you're saying to other people what they're getting, what I got is in this path, it's okay to fall apart.
Oh yeah. No, that's the idea that, and in fact, I was just thinking about this the other day. All of my books are just, I mean, it could be okay. All my poetry books should just be, and Hey God, Hey John should just be, it's okay, dot, 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 for whatever you need to be. The poetry, like a few years ago, I had a book called Remedy that did very well. And that poem I opened up with was in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to fall apart. It's okay. The next book after that was about grief called Upon Departure. It's okay to grieve however you need to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
The book after that, A Fitting In for Sardines, it's okay to practice self love and to look at yourself as a once in a trillion year wonder that will never exist again. It's okay to be proud of yourself. It's okay to love yourself. And the book I'm working on now, which is more of a spiritual path of books called Wonder Ache, which is it's okay to doubt. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to be curious. It's okay to leave the path. And you said it exactly right. "It's okay" is the first two words of how I would describe anything that I've ever written. These are all okay things to be human and to have these experiences. It's part of the adventure.
It sure is. It is, and that's just being real. I mean, when you think about, what is this life? Well, you just start with exactly what you know. I mean, well, if
Yeah.
this is it, this where I'm sitting, if this is life, okay, I got to accept this before I can get anywhere else.
Yeah. Yes,
Right.
and
Yes, and yeah, there you go. That's right.
yeah.
It's like all of life is an improvisational skit. It's like,
A little bit, a little bit. Yeah, I definitely have that to it. And you mentioned it earlier. It's we can't there's certain things we can't control. We can control how we react.
yeah,
We can control how kind we can be to ourselves during it.
yeah.
We can control how much we keep exploring and fighting and keep digging into the dirt. We can control those things, and that's what I try to focus on.
Wow. Well, and there you go. And it's like so life becomes more like a I mean, I think of it maybe like a sport too. I mean, there's improv, right? But then a
Yeah.
sport, like if you're Michael Jordan, you don't know what's going to happen tonight, but you got skills, and you go out there and you do your thing, and maybe you win, maybe you don't.
Yeah, yeah, and it's okay to be, and it's okay not to be great at it every night. Like
Yes.
Michael Jordan missed a ton of shots. It's okay to fail.
Yeah.
We live in a world where failure, and that's I do these writing retreats, and I call them lower. They're not capitalized retreats. It's a lowercase r retreat where I'm not there like teaching people how to become a bestseller. I just go and share my story, read a little bit of poetry, and nudge people to do the same exploration work that I do. And it's okay to be. There's so many. I've met so many writers out there who are far more talented than me, who've been stifled because of the gatekeeping that's out there. So, you're not a real writer, or you're not a real this because you don't have these initials after your name,
Right.
or you don't have an ascot, and you're not wearing a tank top that's a t-shirt that's way too tight for you to have neck tattoos. You can't be a male poet. I mean, whatever it is that we put these expectations on
Uh-huh.
for people, is like we fall in line with it, and it's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to be a terrible writer. It really is. And it's okay for me to be a terrible poet from time to time. It's part of the game.
Wow. It's acceptance. I mean, of
Yeah,
acceptance of our own self. Now,
yeah.
in your work, there's I run across the concept of becoming.
Mm.
Okay. All right. You go. So there you go. Talk more about that. What does that mean to you?
Becoming is about discovering who you were meant to be all along. And a lot of that, and I will tell you, like every poem, the one I opened with, and I even described it, I didn't know what it was about. I knew how I felt, and I wrote, and I could probably edit it and take things out. Every poem I write is an exploration into it. The poem I'll end today, maybe we have a chance to end with today, is the exact same way. I don't really know what it's about till I get halfway through it, and then all of a sudden the light clicks on. It's like, that's what this is about. And every improv game or scene I've been on stage, it always starts a little muddled at first,
Hmm.
and then eventually you get out of your own way and you're like, oh, that's what this is about. And you all look at each other on stage like, I figured the game out. We all silently nod. And then we jump into the joy of all realizing what this was actually about the whole time. I mean, for me, becoming is the antithesis of expectation,
Oh.
of growing up and being. For my child who is living with autism, he's now 24 and he's doing amazing. But there was a time in our life where we were told that he was going to be nonverbal his whole life. He's going to he
Mm.
won't have a first kiss. He won't go to college. He won't have these quintessential experiences that you think your child's going to have. And so it was this idea of like, wait, no, I thought being a parent was XYZ, doing these things and
Oh.
jumping through all these hoops.
Hmm.
And what it taught me early on is like, no, that wasn't the game. That's not what you've been giving. Like, we give these expectations to what our life is going to look like, and we shut everything else out. For me, and I'm not saying this for other people who are raised Catholic, I'm not trying to convince people not to be Catholic. From my experience was being a very traditional Catholic for a good chunk of my life, I was not seeing so much of the other wonder and the possibility that existed outside of this pretty narrow path I was walking for years. I was following the script that was given to me years ago, and I was just going to stay inside that script.
Hmm.
Well, things broke. And now I'm kind of wandering into the woods, finding who I was supposed to be the entire time. And that's what I mean when it's becoming. It's leaning into your purpose. It's finding the game on stage. It's finding the point of the poem while you're writing it in real time. And it's being open to letting it change. There might be a different incarnation of myself in 5 or 6 years. Who knows what it is? The process of becoming lasts until we take our final breath. And so why not be open to that the entire time? It's not a fixed thing. By 50 years old, you're supposed to know what you're doing. I'm a testament that that is not true. I'm maybe 2/3 of the way through my improv game, and I'm willing to bet there's going to be a couple other plot twists coming on down the pike. And I'm not going to be closed off to that the way I was in my 30s and 40s. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to keep saying yes to it and see what becomes of me.
Wow. Wow, I love it. But at the core of that, there is a transcendental faith that there is something to become.
Yeah.
That there is a future, that something else, and it's good, exciting, or it's different.
Yeah.
I mean, well, okay, the vision that I get of this, I mean, there's growth involved in some way. There's a development in this becoming. There are things that have to happen, and there are choices that are made. That those choices are critical, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
To be on this, but the becoming, the fact that it exists as a
Yeah.
concept, that's a huge thing for somebody to to absorb, to believe, and then, I mean, and to know it. I mean, like, there's some things, like, you start out by thinking, okay, that sounds like okay, I think that you can have these concepts about time or whatever these things, but at some point these things become viscerally real, and
Yeah.
then that's when life kind of gets exciting. It's sort of like things sort of start rolling on their own in a way,
Yeah.
and then
No.
you're right.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
It's like an adventure. I mean, all good adventures in any good story, if you look at our lives as these epic adventures, I don't really, my theology is kind of all over the place right now. But I do believe that every one of us are a singular piece of music that will only be played once in the history of the cosmos. With your background, your experience, where you were born on planet Earth at this time, there will only be your little burst of music right now that will only be played once. Your
Right.
story will only be told once, exactly as it is today. And if you look at it like that, it's like, oh, I could just not follow these things, and I could have, close myself off to all the possibility out there. It's easy to do, but to treat life as an adventure, as a story, any good character in any good movie or book, they have to lean into their story and say, okay, we'll see what happens. And they have to say yes to something. All good Frodo Baggins, that story began with a yes. Luke Skywalker, that story began with a yes. Kate Winslet on Titanic, that story began with a yes. Whatever story it is, we
Uh-huh.
have those in our life. We have these epic moments in our life where we have to say yes and say, okay, let's check this out. And that's, I think, keeps us young at heart, and it keeps our whole life as more of an adventure and a story than it is just something we plod through and just check pass time and check the boxes. I don't believe that we were plucked out of nothingness to be here just to pay taxes and to look at the calendar. I think we have these stories and these moments that are waiting for us, but it's exactly right. We have this choice. We have to say yes. And once we do, and it doesn't mean it's always going to be unicorns and lily fields. It's heartbreak and failure and getting hurt. But I'd rather be hurt than be numb. I've been numb. I'd rather fail than to just sit there and not experience anything and watch the clock move. Let me fail. That feels better than nothingness.
Wow. That's being alive.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
and
being
that's really all it is. And when I write poetry, I feel alive because I feel like I'm exploring a part of my heart I've never visited before. And I believe we all have these vast, wild areas in our hearts that we've never visited. And for me, my compass is a pen and a paper. For other people, it's other ways. But that's how I do it.
find your way. That's the
Yeah,
message, right? find your
yeah, that's right.
find your way. Hey, John, I would love to hear another poem. So, based on, if you got some things at hand there, kind of based on
Yeah.
where your head is at the moment, what do you think you could share with us right now?
Yeah, I got a poem. I wrote, it was one of the poems. This is actually before the Head and the Heart poem that I shared with you earlier, that will be part of my Wonder Ache poetry book that's coming out in a little while. That I remember it was during COVID, and my children became these outdoors people all of a sudden and wanted to go fishing all the time. And I'm a terrible, I mean, I'm the kind of person that you need to have like an adult minding me when we're fishing. I get caught in the line, hooks inevitably get stuck embedded deep in my skin. Like I'm a hot mess. Like I should just be wrapped in bubble. And they would take me out fishing, and eventually they would just say, why don't you just sit here safely and we'll go fish. And I remember sitting there, and this was my unraveling from my kind of traditional faith life was definitely in full bore. And I was feeling that shame or worry, or the idea, my old first grade catechism teacher talking about hellfire. And those feelings were come to me as like, I don't really know. I know I believe in something. And I know I believe in love, and I know I believe in energy, but how do what does that even mean? How do I even put a finger on it? And I was sitting there while my kids were fishing, and we were a place called Granite Crystal Lake, which is about 40 miles outside of here in Cheyenne. Here in Wyoming, geographically speaking, my town is kind of like burnt, burnt earth. There's nothing great to see, but you drive about 30 miles somewhere else, and it's gorgeous. And we're
Uh-huh.
kind of sitting in this valley and this granite canyons. And my children are fishing, and I had one of those moments where you can just feel like maybe the eye of everything is on you and something is there. There's a presence there. And it was that very same presence that I had, when I was typing about my own experience with mental health. And this was that same kind of feeling inside of me. It's like, it's okay to have this feeling. It's okay to doubt, because doubt leads to curiosity, and curiosity leads to more wonder. And so I remember sitting there coming to grips with the idea that maybe I'm not the good Catholic that I thought I was. So what am I? And I wrote this poem. And I don't name my poems for some weird, strange reason. It really there's type A people out there. Maybe that's my passive aggressive way of doing that. Is this poem we'll just call number 2.
Okay.
Lately, when I need to pray, I go to a church that has no doors, and where the walls are made of carved granite. I sit under its moving roof on a pew that smells like fresh pine, and I fold my hands quietly until God joins me. Here in this most ancient of churches, I watch a dozen fat rainbow angels dance in the baptismal font in front of me, and I wonder when I too will be made anew. There's a special kind of holy quiet that rings much louder than any big old church bell I've ever known, and that silence often rattles my ribs. Its choir loft is high up in a bird's nest, and its confessional is a breeze, and it asks me to speak my sins to it. And I do, and they're carried away. And the longer I sing my psalms in this church, the shorter my memory is for all my past mistakes. And that's when I hear the voice of love speak to me. And it says, "O tired light, O wounded heart, O my child of crumbling grace, come plant your feet in this Eden. Come rest in this sacred space. O weary traveler, O somber fire, O shaking heart that's prone to fear, come lay in my ribboned water and come to know that I'm right here. O wilting daisy, O dying star, O broken song that needs a name, come sit with me among the wild, and I swear it, you'll never be the same." This voice of love and I take turns saying everything we need to say to one another. I speak in short, heavy, jagged breaths, and God responds in thin, long pauses. And this goes on until the sun sets. And that's when it's time for me to go home. And even though I leave, a part of me always still remains in this antiquated church of trees and valleys, where foxes are lectors and horizons are steeples and the clouds are vestibules and the campfire is incense and time is a gospel, where the great flow is my favorite sacrament, where the forest is my community. And it's a place where a little piece of me will always still remain, talking to the voice of whispering love as I watch trout be slain in the spirit. And I swear it, I can't stop marveling at the altar of creation.
My God. Thank you, John
Oh,
Roedel.
thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This is such a great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are welcome. You're welcome. And that is all for this episode of Audible River. And we would love to hear your thoughts or questions about our podcast. So please email us at audibleriverpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.